That evening, after dinner, I felt overheated, and my back was drenched in sweat. I decided to take a shower to feel more at ease. The bathroom was cramped, but the warm water on my skin felt soothing and delightful. Once I finished my shower, I changed into a soft beige dress with a V-neck and a long zipper at the back, which I usually wear at home. I walked into the bedroom and slipped it on. When I tried to pull up the zipper, I found it stuck in the center. No matter how hard I tried, it wouldn't budge. At first, I looked around, unsure, and considered calling my husband for help. But as I walked into the living room, I noticed the dim light was on, and my father-in-law was sitting in the chair. He glanced up when he heard my footsteps, his expression slightly surprised. "Where are your husband and father?" I asked, my voice a bit unsure. "Aiden just left, probably to run some errands." "Is something wrong?" he asked calmly. I bit my lip, realizing there was no other option. "My zipper is stuck. Could you help me?" Hearing this, he set his teacup down, stood, and walked toward me. "Let me have a look." As he stood just behind me, the closeness between us felt somewhat uncomfortable. His breath lightly brushed the back of my neck, making me uneasy. He carefully took hold of the zipper, frowning slightly. "It seems to be caught in the fabric," he said, beginning to pull it. I heard a soft click, and everything happened too quickly. The zipper slid down forcefully, and the soft silk skirt fell to my feet. In an instant, I stood there, frozen. For a brief moment, I felt a sense of timelessness. The breeze from the window rushed in, leaving my skin cold. "Hello, my name is Leah, and I'm 28 years old. I've been married to Aiden for 3 years. Our marriage appears perfect on the surface, with a beautiful house, a successful career, and financial stability. Aiden is a wonderful family man who is always loyal to me. As for myself, I'm proud of my growing career, which allows me to showcase my abilities and find joy in my daily work. We live with my father-in-law, Mr. John, who is in his late 60s, strong and calm. He is a remarkable person whom I admire greatly. He serves as both a father figure in our family and a mediator when Aiden and I argue. Our disagreements are mostly about having children. Aiden wants a more complete family with the sound of children's laughter, but I am not ready yet. I want to focus on my career for a while and achieve my personal goals before becoming a mother. This topic has sparked ongoing debates, but our differences never diminished our love for each other. Aiden has always been patient and understanding, so after each disagreement, I've tried to explain my viewpoint. My father-in-law always steps in kindly and offers advice. He stresses that family is about mutual understanding and that everything can be solved over time. Aiden and I have learned to listen to each other and compromise, and we owe that to him. I once thought our lives would continue smoothly like this, but one evening, everything changed dramatically. That day was like any other. I woke up earlier than usual to prepare breakfast for the family. Aiden usually prefers a simple breakfast, just a slice of bread with a cup of black coffee. I treated myself to a glass of warm milk to start the day. My father-in-law, Mr. John, continued reading the newspaper while sipping his tea. Every morning, the air in the house is calm, warm, and filled with pleasant aromas from the kitchen. After breakfast, I quickly got ready for work. My office tasks weren't overly demanding, but they required focus. I wore a white shirt, stylish pants, and light high heels, which boosted my confidence. On my way to the office, I stopped by a nearby coffee shop for another latte to treat myself before a long day ahead. That particular day, work was busier than usual. The back-to-back meetings left me with little time to rest. I tried my best to respond to each email, report, and task promptly, but I kept a positive attitude, knowing that my work wasn't just a responsibility, it was my passion. When the clock struck 5 p.m., I packed my things and left the office. As I stepped outside, the beautiful afternoon sunlight enveloped me, easing the stress of a hectic day at work. I dropped by the grocery store close to my house today to pick up some fresh produce. I planned to prepare a more refined dinner than usual because it had been quite some time since the whole family gathered to share a meal together in a relaxed setting. Upon arriving home, I went straight to the kitchen, where Aiden had just returned. He smiled and assisted me in setting the table. The meal was ready with steaming chicken soup, grilled fish, and fragrant stir-fried vegetables. My father-in-law casually walked out of his study, pleased to see dinner. We all sat down to enjoy the meal, chatting and laughing, even though there were some minor disagreements about having children. Family dinners remain, for me, the most treasured moments. I never expected that, after the peaceful dinner, something unexpected would disturb the calm. After eating, I felt a bit uncomfortable and went to the restroom. The cold water helped to soothe the anxiety building up in me. After my shower, I put on my favorite cream-colored silk dress with a zipper in the back. As I stood in front of the mirror to zip it up, I noticed the zipper was caught halfway. I tried to fix it, but couldn't get it to close. I stepped out into the living room, intending to ask Aiden for help, but it was empty. I called out, "Where are you, Aiden?" But there was no answer. My father-in-law, who had been reading in a chair, looked up and said, "Aiden stepped outside for a moment. What's wrong?" I hesitated for a second before saying, "My zipper's stuck. I can't zip it up. Could you help me?" He put down the book and stood up. "Let me have a look," he said calmly. I moved aside, lowering my head to give him better access to the zipper. His strong fingers gently touched it. "It seems to be caught in the fabric," he said, trying to pull it up. However, when he applied more pressure, the zipper slipped out with a soft swish, causing the dress to slide down. I was left frozen, unsure of how to react. We both stood there surprised. I remained motionless, feeling embarrassed and confused. He quickly turned away, his voice filled with regret. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." I hastily gathered the dress, my hands trembling. "It's okay, Dad. The dress is just a little loose," I muttered, not daring to look up. He took a few steps back, trying to regain his composure. "Fix it yourself. Wait for Aiden to come back," he said before quickly leaving the room, leaving me alone. The atmosphere felt suffocating and uncomfortable. My heart was racing, and I felt humiliated and disoriented. I couldn't focus on anything that night. Every time I thought of Mr. J's apologetic look, I felt a heavy weight on my chest. I couldn't understand what he was thinking, and that made me even more uneasy. Aiden came home late, seemingly unaware of what had happened. He was cheerful and chatty, oblivious to my unease. I tried to act normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling of confusion. In the days following the incident, I noticed a change in Mr. J. He no longer interacted with me the way he used to, often avoiding eye contact whenever we crossed paths at home. This made me anxious, but I didn't know how to address it. Still, I would occasionally catch him looking at me, his gaze searching for something. At those moments, I would quickly turn away, trying to appear calm despite the turmoil inside. I couldn't figure out what he was thinking, and it only added to my anxiety. I tried to convince myself that everything would eventually pass and that time would heal the invisible rifts. I was mistaken that morning. I was weary, my throat ached, and my mind was racing. After checking my temperature, I realized I had a slight fever. Aiden had left early for work, so I decided to take the day off to recover. My father-in-law stayed home as usual, spending his time in the study, reading books and newspapers, or occupied with his own activities. I lay in bed for a long time, feeling so drained that all I could do was try to sleep. But since the room was too warm, I chose to move to the living room to get some cool air. I was dressed in simple pajamas, my hair loose, and my face pale from illness. When I entered the living room, I saw Mr. John sitting in a chair, intently focused on his phone screen. I murmured a soft "hello," but he didn't answer. Instead, he lifted his gaze to stare at me, his eyes no longer the calm ones I was familiar with. "Aren't you feeling well?" he asked, his voice louder than usual. "Yes, I have a mild fever, so I'm taking the day off," I replied, trying to keep my composure. He didn't say anything else, just nodded, but his eyes remained fixed on me, as if searching for something in my expression. This made me feel very uneasy. I considered walking outside to escape the tension, but as I turned around, I heard him call, "Leah, come here. I need to tell you something." I froze, my heart tightening with an unfamiliar sensation. Mr. John stood up, his eyes determined as he looked directly at me. The air in the room grew heavy. I could feel my heart pounding and my palms sweating. "Leah, you are stunning," he whispered, his voice low and resonating in the stillness. I froze, as if my legs had turned to jelly. My whole body felt cold, and each word he spoke seemed like a dagger to my heart. "Dad, what are you talking about?" I asked, my voice trembling, but he didn't reply. Quickly, he moved closer, and with each step, it felt as though the space around me was closing in. His gaze was locked on me, unblinking. For a moment, he stood still and said, "Leah, could you just let me see you again?" I stood there, unable to believe what I had just heard. My eyes widened as I looked for any sign that he was joking, but there was none. His stare was so intense that it left me speechless. "Dad!" I almost shouted, trying to keep my composure. "How can you say such things? Don't you feel terrible for Aiden?" He hesitated, a confused expression on his face, but his gaze never left mine. "Leah, I have no idea what happened to me," he murmured softly, his voice pleading. "Since that day, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you." I took a step back, trying to distance myself. "Dad, what you said is completely wrong. You're ruining the bond in this family. I'm your daughter-in-law." "I know," he interrupted, his voice rising but then softening. "I understand, but I can't control this feeling." "Dad," I shouted, my voice shaking, tears filling my eyes. "I don't want to hear it anymore. I can't believe you're saying this." Mr. John stood still, his gaze lowered as though battling something within himself. The air in the room felt suffocating. After a long pause, he sighed deeply, slumping his shoulders, and spoke softly, but with a tremor in his voice. "Leah, I'm not sure why things turned out this way. I'm sorry, but I can't lie to myself any longer." I stood there, confused and panicked, unable to move. He approached slowly, each step deliberate and heavy, his eyes locked on me, filled with inner turmoil and an indescribable sorrow. I backed up, but the small table behind me blocked my way, leaving me trapped. "I know this is wrong," he said quietly but firmly, "but I can't ignore this feeling. I don't want to hurt you, but I haven't stopped thinking about you since that day." My heart was racing so wildly it felt like it would burst from my chest. "Dad, do you understand what you're saying? We can't do this. It's wrong. It will destroy everything," I cried, my voice breaking with despair. He stopped in front of me, his eyes full of sorrow. "I understand, Leah. I know all of this, but I also know I can't go back. Do you feel it too?" His question cut deep, like a scalpel. I shook my head, trying to reject it, but my body betrayed me. His eyes were pleading, not with force, but with a deep sense of helplessness and vulnerability. I don't know what happened next, but everything around me seemed to blur, and the sounds faded away. When he stepped closer, the space between us almost disappeared. I didn't take all of the invisible barriers down. In an instant, all the obstacles between him and me disappeared. Once it was over, I sat in the chair, my hands shaking uncontrollably. My heart kept pounding, but the emotion I felt was pure dread, not anger. I couldn't comprehend what had just taken place. Mr. JN stood before me, his eyes wide with astonishment. "Leah," he began, but his voice faltered. "No," I replied, my voice trembling. "Don't say anything. Please, don't say another word." I stood, despite feeling as though my legs had no strength left. I attempted to walk quickly toward the door, and just as my hand reached the doorknob, he spoke again. His voice was filled with regret. "Leah, I am sorry. Truly sorry." I didn't look back. I just walked out of the room, tears flowing down my face, overwhelmed by remorse and sorrow. I didn't know how I would face myself, Aiden, or John after what had just happened. That night, I lay in bed, restless, my mind flooded with images, sensations, and fragments of conversations. I wondered how things had spiraled out of control. How could we face reality now? I had no answers, and perhaps neither did John. In the following days, I was consumed by constant agony. The thought of telling Aiden the truth weighed heavily on me, but every time I considered it, I felt helpless. I knew that if Aiden found out, his relationship with my father would be forever altered. The special bond they shared would be shattered irreparably. I tried to keep everything bottled up, hiding my pain and shame, but it only made me feel more trapped. I realized the only way out was to leave this place. That was the only way to prevent things from getting worse and to protect the family from falling apart. I started making plans, but I tried to act as though everything was fine, pretending nothing was wrong. I didn't want Aiden to notice anything unusual until I gathered the courage to share my true feelings. Every day, I prepared breakfast, cleaned, and smiled as if everything were normal. But deep down, I had already made my decision. One evening, after dinner, I waited in the living room for the right moment to speak. "Aiden," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady, "I have something important to tell you." Aiden looked up, his face filled with concern. "What's wrong?" Is something wrong? I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. I think we should leave. We need to start over somewhere new. I think it's what's best for both of us. Aiden paused, his brow furrowed. Why would you suddenly want that? Things are going well here. Is there something wrong? I shook my head and forced a smile. No, it's nothing. I just think it's time for us to have some space. Time to go. Aiden placed his hand on my shoulder. Leah, I know something's bothering you. You don't have to keep it from me. Please, tell me what's going on. Before I could respond, John came down the stairs. He had overheard everything. Leah's right, John said, his voice calm but firm. Aiden, I think it's time for you two to go. You and Leah need space to build your future. I don't want to keep you here any longer. Aiden stared at him, his face filled with disbelief. But Dad, I don't want to leave you. I think we can still be happy here together. Mr. John smiled and patted Aiden's shoulder. You don't need to worry about me. I'm fine. You and Leah need to figure out what's best for your future. Aiden was quiet for a long time, his expression softening. Finally, he nodded. If you think it's the right thing, Dad, I'll accept it, but I'll visit you often. I said nothing, just lowered my gaze, feeling a mixture of sadness and relief. I understood why Mr. JN had helped me. It was his way of making amends and ensuring the family stayed intact. That night, I stood by the window in my room, feeling empty. I knew leaving was the right choice, but the sorrow and guilt would follow me wherever I went. My experience taught me an invaluable lesson. Every mistake starts with a small breach of boundaries. Sometimes, a moment of carelessness or vulnerability can lead to unforeseen consequences. None of us are perfect, but it's important to acknowledge and fix our flaws. Always cherish the connections you have, especially with family. Family is more than just a sanctuary. It's a responsibility to protect. One wrong move can destroy everything we've built over the years, so stay vigilant. Know your limits, and don't let your emotions control you. To others in similar situations, my advice is to choose the option that causes the least harm to everyone. Leaving may not always be an escape, but sometimes it's the best way to protect those you love. Learn to let go, because not only does it free you, but it also helps you keep the values you want to preserve. I left that place, carrying both pain and valuable lessons. Life is a long journey, and I promise myself never to make the same mistake again. My story ends here, but what happened taught me the most important lesson of all, the value of family and responsibility. Thank you for listening. I hope my story helps you avoid similar mistakes.